You want to understand Gaza. Not just the headlines, but, the deeper currents, the humanitarian crisis, the legal maze, and this overwhelming challenge of what comes next. Today on the Deep Dive, we're aiming to cut through some of that noise. We'll pull the most vital insights from recent sources, news reports, international analyses, key legal documents, really give you a shortcut to being well-informed.
That's absolutely right. Our mission here is to untangle those layers of information. We're here to extract the key facts, the perspectives on Gaza's future, the escalating humanitarian crisis, and, importantly, the international and legal frameworks that are shaping what's happening. The goal is really to help you grasp what this all means for the people on the ground and, frankly, the incredibly difficult path forward.
Okay, so let's dive right in, starting with the very latest developments from the ground. This is as of August 17th, 2025. Our sources are showing Israel's got this plan to relocate residents to the southern Gaza Strip. They've even deployed tents, shelter equipment.
Yeah, I saw that report.
But Hamas has strongly rejected this. They're calling it a blatant deception, warning it's a new wave of genocide and displacement for hundreds of thousands of people.
A really strong rejection, though.
Absolutely. And alongside this, the humanitarian situation is just. It's escalating. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reported at least 18 Palestinians killed just on August 17th in Israeli strikes and gunfire. And the specifics are quite harrowing.
Yeah.
7 people, reportedly waiting for food aid in Gaza City, were shot dead. This was apparently a drone strike in a hospital courtyard.
In a hospital courtyard?
Yes. Now, witnesses claim these 7 were members of a Hamas unit distributing aid and fighting thieves. Our sources noted no comment from the Israeli military on that specific incident. Beyond that, 4 others killed in a tent in Khan Yunis, 6 near an aid distribution point down south, and 1 more near an aid site in central Gaza.
It paints a truly dire picture. And, UN-backed experts have been warning about widespread famine. This is driven by, drastically curtailed humanitarian aid and convoys being looted repeatedly. We're also seeing ongoing Israeli airstrikes across the Strip, pretty much overnight and into the morning. And the Israeli military seems to be preparing a broader offensive in Gaza City, focusing on the Zaytun neighborhood specifically. And just for context, Hamas had previously called this whole relocation idea part of a brutal assault to occupy Gaza City.
So that's the immediate brutal reality there. But shifting focus slightly, there's also growing internal pressure inside Israel. On that same day, August 17th, there were major demonstrations across Israel. People calling for an end to the war, a deal to release the remaining hostages.
Still a major issue, the hostages.
Huge. Sources confirm 49 captives are still in Gaza. The Israeli military believes 27 of them, tragically, are dead. In Tel Aviv's hostage square, they unfurled this enormous Israeli flag covered with portraits of the captives, a really powerful symbol.
Yeah.
But this is really exposing divisions within Israel, too. Demonstrators blocked roads, even the main Tel Aviv-Jerusalem highway, setting tires on fire. Protest organizers were calling for a general strike.
Wow, a general strike call. That's significant.
It is. And there's been serious pushback from some in the government. Far-right Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, for example, he slammed the protests, called them a perverse and harmful campaign that plays into the hands of Hamas.
Strong words.
He argued it buries the hostages in tunnels and risks Israel's security.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, that tension between the military objectives, the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding, and these mounting domestic calls for a resolution inside Israel, it's just stark, undeniable, really. It shows the immense conflicting pressures from all sides.
That sense of immense pressure, yeah, both external and internal.
Yeah.
It makes these underlying legal questions feel even more critical. Because beyond the day-to-day headlines, there's this fundamental, long-running debate about the legal status of Gaza itself. Israel says it disengaged in 2005, but what does international law actually say about something like occupation? It's complex.
It's very complex.
Even U.S. President Biden cautioned against Israel reoccupying Gaza. Remember that back in October 2023? Israel's official line is that the 2005 withdrawal ended the occupation because they ceded effective control. Yet, you have Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant recently saying that after this conflict, Israel would no longer have responsibility for life in the Gaza Strip. That certainly hints at some kind of ongoing engagement, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And what's really striking here is how international law defines occupation. It considers a territory occupied when it's under the effective control of hostile foreign armed forces. And this isn't about perception or what someone declares. It's a question of fact. what's actually happening.
A question of fact, okay.
Effective control traditionally means things like a physical military presence without consent, the local sovereign being unable to exercise control because of those foreign forces, and the occupying force imposing its authority.
So it's not about saying we're not occupiers, it's about the reality on the ground. Does that mean a country could technically be seen as an occupier, even if they deny it?
Exactly.
And if that's the case, what responsibilities kick in?
Precisely. When a territory is considered occupied, international law brings in a very specific set of rules. You can think of it like a rule book. The occupying power has clear responsibilities. Maintain law and order, look after civilian welfare, ensure food and medical supplies get through, even facilitate aid efforts.
Okay.
But just as important are the prohibitions, the things they cannot do. No hostage taking, no collective punishment, and absolutely no forcible transfers of civilians unless there are truly unavoidable imperative security or military reasons. And they must respect private property.
Right.
Now, this raises a key point. If Israel is not legally considered an occupying power, then those specific occupation-related duties wouldn't strictly apply in the same way. However, and this is crucial, even if it's not technically occupation, the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law, IHL, still bind all parties involved in the conflict. These are universal rules, things like prohibiting targeting civilians, using starvation as a weapon of war, any forcible transfer or displacement, and of course targeting medical facilities. Those apply regardless.
That's a really critical distinction. So if the legal label of occupation isn't met, what are the practical differences for people there? Does it change how aid gets delivered or the responsibility for civilian protection, even if IHL always applies?
It absolutely impacts the specifics, the practicalities, and potentially the legal recourse later on. The duties spelled out under occupation law are, well, generally more extensive in terms of providing for the population's needs directly. But as I said, IHL remains the absolute bedrock for everyone in any armed conflict. It demands protection for civilians, respect for basic human needs, and this is why international legal bodies are watching so closely.
Makes sense.
For instance, the Rome Statute, that's the treaty for the International Criminal Court, considers certain acts war crimes, like an occupying power transferring its own civilians into occupied territory, or deporting or transferring the occupied population, even if it's done through coercion or psychological pressure. And the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, seems poised to offer some concrete views on Israel's status and obligations. Now, their advisory opinions aren't strictly binding legally, but they carry huge weight and can heavily influence how other courts interpret these responsibilities.
Okay.
It's worth noting, though, the ICJ specifically excluded Israel's actions in Gaza after October 7, 2023, from the scope of its July 2024 advisory opinion. But its broader findings on the West Bank and East Jerusalem are certainly relevant context.
So weaving all this together, what does it actually mean for Gaza's future, especially when you factor in the sheer scale of destruction we've seen? The statistics are just hard to comprehend. 90%, 1.9 million people out of Gaza's 2.2 million population are displaced.
90%.
70% of the housing stock is damaged or destroyed. It's left behind 42 million tons of rubble, mostly from homes. And to put that into perspective, our sources say Israel has dropped an estimated 70,000 tons of bombs. Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
That surpasses the combined tonnage dropped on Dresden, Hamburg, and London in World War II.
It really paints a stark picture of the immense challenges ahead. I mean, think about what this means practically. Rebuilding Gaza isn't just about money, it's a multi-generational project.
Right.
Reconstruction costs, estimated over $50 billion. And the timeline, frankly, at previous rebuilding rates in Gaza, it would take 80 years just to rebuild the destroyed homes.
80 years.
80 years! That's generations. Even if somehow they could work 5 times faster, you're still looking at 15 years, minimum, which means hundreds of thousands of people are facing possibly decades in interim shelters. It's not just about buildings, it's the social fabric.
And what makes it even harder?
Well, you've got factors like the ongoing conflict, obviously, low international trust, a huge lack of funding committed so far, a limited workforce on the ground, bureaucratic delays, and then there are Israel's dual-use restrictions on materials like concrete and timber things that have really slowed down reconstruction efforts in the past and will likely continue to be huge hurdles.
So this is where it gets really interesting, because the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, in their analysis, they highlight 4 absolutely critical questions, questions that desperately need answers for any kind of sustainable end to this war.
Okay, what are they?
First, who will actually govern Gaza? Immediately, and then long term. Second, Who provides security, maintains law and order? Third, who is going to fund and oversee this monumental task of reconstruction? We just talked about the scale.
50 billion plus, yeah.
And finally, maybe the hardest one. What kind of political pathway could possibly lead to a genuinely better, peaceful future for everyone involved, Israelis and Palestinians?
Those are the fundamental questions, aren't they?
Absolutely. And the Carnegie source also suggests that this current approach, the sort of interim ceasefire and hostage deal cycle, has pretty much run its course. It's become, in their words, a zero-sum exercise. It notes that the Israeli government's appetite for occupation seems to have grown, that Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly wants to occupy the entire area, maybe as a prelude to annexation. Publicly, Netanyahu has said Israel plans to widen its offensive beyond Gaza City into the areas not yet under its control. That includes the central camps Nuseirat and Barej and Muwasi, which is that huge area full of displacement camps now.
And those areas are believed to be Hamas strongholds, maybe where hostages are.
That's the stated belief, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Potentially holding hostages. Netanyahu has also laid out his conditions for ending the war. Hamas giving up power, laying down arms, and releasing the remaining 50 hostages, of whom, remember, maybe only 20 or so are thought to be alive.
Okay.
He's even vowed, quite controversially, to eventually relocate much of Gaza's population to other countries through what he calls voluntary immigration.
Voluntary immigration.
Right. But Palestinians and, frankly, most of the international community see that as essentially forced expulsion, especially given that large parts of Gaza are simply uninhabitable right now.
Yeah, that term voluntary is doing a lot of work there, and it raises a really important question. While Netanyahu talks about setting up designated safe zones with, ample food, water, and medical care, our sources point out that Muwasi, which was previously designated a humanitarian zone, is already incredibly overcrowded. It lacks basic services.
Right.
And it's even been hit by Israeli airstrikes. An Israeli official apparently indicated these broader offensive plans are partly aimed at putting pressure on various parties. So it really highlights the immense challenge of ensuring actual safety and meeting basic needs for a population that has almost nothing left to lose. The whole concept of a safe zone becomes very complicated.
Extremely complicated. So given this enormous displacement, this level of destruction, how do you even begin to think about housing people? Where do they go? Our sources dive into different strategies for post-conflict shelter, and some of the ideas are really thought-provoking. We know that the traditional approach, temporary tent camps like the one set up in Gaza way back in 1948, or the informal settlements we see now in Muwasi, holding maybe 700,000 people.
Yeah, those often become permanent fixtures.
Exactly. They become permanent, leading to, frankly, a pretty poor quality of life. Squalid conditions, bad health outcomes, idleness, lack of public safety, and, worryingly, a potential breeding ground for radicalization. The Jabalia refugee camp is such a stark example. Started temporary, became this dense, congested urban space, narrow alleys, poor sanitation, and now largely destroyed in this current war.
It's a grim cycle. But what's fascinating here is that the RAND report we looked at proposes a much more multifaceted approach for interim shelter. It tries to actually avoid those pitfalls. It really integrates lessons learned from other post-conflict recovery efforts around the world. The goal isn't just temporary shelter. It's about laying the groundwork for good urban planning, for reestablishing communities right from day one.
A strategic approach, rather than just reactive. I like that. So the RAND report lays out, 4 main ways to think about sheltering Gazans, acknowledging that you probably need a mix of all of them.
That's right. A combination is likely necessary.
Okay, so first, there's the reality that some Gazans have already left. They've sought shelter outside Gaza. Our sources mentioned 115,000 had crossed into Egypt by June 2024.
Right, that's one piece of the puzzle.
Then, there are 2 main ways to think about rebuilding within Gaza's existing urban fabric. One is what they call raise and rebuild, basically for areas completely flattened or maybe poorly planned zones like some older refugee camps. This lets you start fresh, maybe with new urban designs, taller buildings, more open space.
A clean slate in some areas.
Exactly. But then there's also, and this sounds really interesting, incremental urbanism.
Yes, incremental urbanism.
This is for areas that are significantly damaged, but not totally destroyed, where some buildings might be repairable. The approach starts small, with like starter cores or starter shells, maybe just the ground floor and an initial structure. And then residents gradually repair or expand their homes and communities over time, often following the existing street layouts.
And the report notes this is actually already happening organically on the ground in some places, people finding ways to rebuild bit by bit.
Which is powerful, yeah. Okay, so that's rebuilding in existing areas. What's the third approach?
The third approach tackles the camps themselves, but with new thinking.
Okay.
So inevitably, you'll have informal tented settlements popping up, often near people's original homes, and you'll likely have the conventional UN-style camps, that standard dense aid model. But Rand proposes a third type: future-oriented camps.
Future-oriented.
These are planned from the very beginning, not just as temporary fixes, but as potential long-term neighborhoods. They'd use those principles of incremental urbanism we just discussed. They'd be located strategically, maybe on the edges of existing cities, on less damaged, undeveloped land. They'd have planned street grids designed to allow for future growth and densification. The whole idea is to avoid the design flaws of past camps, like Jabalia, aiming for lower density, better living conditions. Maybe prioritize people from nearby destroyed cities for these spots.
That makes a lot of sense. Planning for the future, not just the immediate crisis. And the fourth option?
The fourth option is building entirely new neighborhoods on completely undeveloped land, what they call greenfield sites.
Starting from scratch.
Exactly. In some ways, it can be easier than rebuilding heavily damaged areas because you're putting in all new infrastructure. The report cites Hamad City in Gaza, which was funded by Qatar, as a kind of precedent. They built about 3,000 apartments relatively quickly there, though it acknowledges there were challenges with allocation and providing services adequately.
Okay, so 4 distinct options, likely used in combination.
Right. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, these options really illustrate 2 potential very different futures for Gaza. There's the default scenario, where there's an over-reliance on those conventional sprawling camps.
The kind we've seen before.
Exactly. They end up competing with vital agricultural land, lead to poor urban development. And critically, in the long term of this default scenario, the report estimates over 3/4 of the displaced population would still be living in camps.
3/4. Still in camps, long term. That's bleak.
It is. Imagine generations growing up in what were meant to be temporary shelters.
But there's the other vision, the future-oriented scenario, or the preferred scenario, as the report called it. That offers a different path, right?
A radically different vision, yes. In this scenario, rebuilding is treated as long-term city planning right from day one. Yes, immediate tent camps are still needed, but there's a much deeper commitment to rebuilding the existing cities and villages properly. And those peripheral camps we talked about, they're designed specifically to evolve into permanent, functioning neighborhoods.
So how did that look different on the ground initially?
Well, in the immediate term, this preferred scenario allocates about 4 times more land to those future-oriented camps, housing a significant chunk of the displaced. And it dedicates twice as much land to those salvageable neighborhoods where that incremental urbanism approach can really take root.
Okay, so a different emphasis right from the start.
Exactly. And the long-term outcome is the key difference.
Which is?
Critically, in the long term of this future-oriented scenario, no one is projected to still be living in camps.
Well, no one.
No one. Almost half the population would be living in neighborhoods that grew out of those well-planned, future-oriented camps. And twice as many people would live in rebuilt urban cores and city edges compared to the default path.
And does it use resources differently? Land, for instance.
That's another crucial point. This strategic approach actually ends up using about 25% less land overall for the same number of people because it's planned more efficiently and allows for appropriate density over time. It highlights better long-term livability and resource management.
Less land, better outcomes.
It really boils down to a fundamental choice, doesn't it, for the international community, for everyone involved. Do they go for a kind of triage approach, prioritizing what seems familiar, maybe cheaper in the short term, but basically just perpetuating the cycle of temporary fixes in camps? Or do they commit to a strategic long-term vision, one that signals a serious, genuine commitment to rebuilding not just buildings, but Gaza's civic life, a real quality of existence for its people? The choice has profound, long-lasting implications.
Wow. Okay, our deep dive today has really covered a lot of ground. From the immediate crisis in Gaza, the fighting, the humanitarian emergency, through the really complex legal arguments around occupation and international law, to the absolutely devastating scale of destruction, and then these challenging but maybe hopeful visions for how you even begin to rebuild shelter in communities.
Yeah, the sources definitely reveal a stark reality. Whether it's through continued conflict or eventually through attempts at reconstruction, the future for Gaza involves just immense challenges. It's going to demand unprecedented levels of humanitarian aid, real urban planning ingenuity, and sustained political will from all sides, something that's often been lacking.
So after hearing all this, what stands out to you, our listener, as we think about the immense human suffering, this incredibly long road to recovery? Think about the roles that international law, political strategies, and these urban planning models might play. Is there a way, do you think, to balance those immediate desperate needs with the longer-term aspirations for a truly sustainable, humane future for Gaza? Something to really mull over.